For the McLaren Formula One team, speed is everything. When every second counts, there's no time to dig through data. Dropbox Dash finds what you need fast across all your work apps, so you can focus on what matters. Less busy work, more breakthroughs. High-performing teams rely on high-performing tools like Dropbox Dash. Learn more at dropbox.com/McLaren F1.
This episode of Manage Smarter is presented by Sales Fuel Coach, our adaptive sales coaching featuring 5-minute quick coaching personalized to each sales rep. Learn more about Sales Fuel Coach at salesfuel.com. Welcome to the Manage Smarter podcast with hosts C. Lee Smith and Audrey Strong. We're glad you're here for discussions on new ways to manage smarter, hire, develop and retain talent, improve results, and propel team performance to new heights. This is the Manage Smarter podcast.
Welcome to Manage Smarter, everyone. We're glad that you're joining us amid what I would say are historical times, Lee. I'm Audrey Strong, the Vice President of Communications here at Sales Fuel.
And I'm C. Lee Smith, the President and CEO of Sales Fuel. You know, with the coronavirus crisis, I learned something about myself just in the past week that I didn't know about myself. It's like, you know, I've always been a big fan of Tom Peters and, you know, the term that he coined, management by wandering around. But, you know, I never really realized how much I actually do it till I didn't have any place to wander anymore. When, you know, no one's working in the office, everyone's working from home around. It's like, and now I'm kind of out of sorts. I really want to know how I can continue doing what I've always done, but now I have to do it remotely.
That's right. So we're going to ask for thoughts from the master. Tom Peters, co-author of In Search of Excellence, the book that really changed the way the world does business. Tagged as the best business book ever. Also the author of The Excellence Dividend. He's written 17 books, over 3 decades of leadership in this. Still at the forefront of the management guru industry. The recipient of the Thinkers50 Lifetime Achievement Award and the creator of the Managing by Wandering Around. So Tom, thank you for coming to the phone on what's a difficult week, I know.
My pleasure.
So what do you do when your team is all in separate locations? What's the solution?
Well, I want to add one thing before I start. You said I was the creator of managing by wandering around, and I certainly was not the creator. My co-author of In Search of Excellence, Bob Waterman, and I discovered it one fine morning in Palo Alto when we paid a visit to Hewlett-Packard. And we're told about the HP way, and perhaps the centerpiece of the HP way was MBWA, Managing by Wandering Around. My real answer is that I'm working on a new book, and I started it out with Managing by Wandering Around. But I see MBWA as a metaphor rather than a physical act. The MBWA point is informally creating a word, or to steal from Rich Sheridan of Menlo Innovations, who wrote a book called Joy, Inc., and sincerely believes that a joyous workplace is not a reach, but very much doable. So MBWA is attitude. And, you know, it is an attitude that, here's how far I would go. I would substitute MBPA, managing by phoning about, but I would not substitute MPMA, which would be managing by messaging around. And again, the people who are listening to us and so on, you're more than welcome to discount me 90% because I'm an old guy rather than a young guy. But you will never convince me that the nuance of the human voice is not 100 times better than you could possibly do with an email or a message. Voice has almost as much body language as the body does. One of the things I've said relative to MBWA writ large, if you are running a 12-person team, and let's suggest it has some permanence, not somebody who's just managing a 3-week project team. If you're managing a 12-person team, those 12 people, where they are in school, how they did in their soccer game last week, then as far as I'm concerned, you are intimacy, kindness, thoughtfulness. That is the essence of leadership. One of my very favorite stories is the day before D-Day in June of 1944. The flamboyant leader of the British soldiers, eventually Lord Montgomery, made, it was said, one of the finest motivational speeches that has ever been made. The head of all the Allied troops, Dwight David Eisenhower, General Eisenhower, went down to the beach, walked among the troops, put his arm around them, muttered a couple of words, and that was it. And, I read this in a Eisenhower biography, and the Eisenhower biography cited some kind of diary that one of the soldiers had. And the line about Eisenhower was, he was so attached to his soldiers that parents were willing to send their sons to die for him. And, and I'm kind of emphasizing this because every now and then we still find the old-fashioned manager who says, being nice is not what this is all about. It's about output. Well, that person can go stuff it as far as I'm concerned. And obviously what I've just said in the last 4 or 5 minutes is true times 100, if not times 1,000, as we, face this coronavirus monster that all of us have to deal with. So MBWA doesn't have much to do with walking. It has everything in the world to do with intimacy.
Yeah, and I think your point, though, about texting and messaging like that is so true, because, how many times have you sent an email or a text message or whatever, and somebody totally interprets it in a manner in which you did not intend, or never thought in a million years that they could have interpreted it that way, but yet somehow they do.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll tell you a funny story about email. My wife and I have, for taxes and so on, an accountant who helps us, and for various reasons we changed accountants. And I get emails from them, obviously, upon some more or less regular occasion. And by about the 5th email, I realized that every email started with, "Hi, Tom," comma, space, and then the text. And then afterwards, "Regards," or "Have a good day," comma, "Barbara." And I thought to myself, this really matters. So much of the time when you sit down to do an email, let alone a message, you've got something urgent on your mind. I want to tell you something, and I want to pass this on. I want to pass it on right now. And I just think, and I've totally, even if it's a 1-line email, I have totally stolen that from my friend Barbara and her colleagues. And it's just a, little teeny touch of humanity. But one of my favorite quotes in the world comes from Henry Clay. And the bad news is I can't remember what the quote was, but what I do remember is Clay's comment was, "It is the little touches that stick the longest in our minds." And I think that's really the case. And the other thing about the email thing is, for God's sakes, number one rule is never put the address on until the end as the last thing, to make sure you don't do something inadvertent, which we all have.
That's a great tip.
Yeah, absolutely. I had blown one of those, and I gave a speech at a conference, and I said, you guys are paying a lot of money for me to be here, and I'm going to earn all that money in the first 5 minutes, and then I might go home. And told them about a major boo-boo that I had made with an address. But I don't think emails have to match Van Gogh or Picasso. But I made a comment that was pretty audacious, and then I checked it with a good friend who was a really high-powered shrink to see if I was completely out of my mind. I said, if you will take leader X and you will send me a random selection of 10 10-line emails, I believe that I can do a full-scale psychiatric evaluation of that person from just those 10 emails. But he said, yeah, probably 8. And I found my quote, by the way. This is Henry Clay. Courtesies of a small and trivial character are the ones which strike deepest in the grateful and appreciating heart. And that's a power sentence, if ever.
Especially in trying times like this. This is a time where managers actually really need to show empathy and maybe a little bit of lenience, consideration, maybe a little bit, work a little harder at that, because we really need to let our people know that we care about them and their health and their families. And we understand that they have high anxiety as well. And to take all that stuff into consideration. And so the soft skills, I got to believe right now are really in play. And that's one of the reasons why I was excited to have you on the show today.
Well, I got, somebody sent me a paper because they know my interests, and it was about a healthcare group, and they started hiring for empathy first, credentials second. And in this particular area that had to do with home health care and so on, and I can send you the paper because I'm not lying about the numbers. The average annual turnover in that area is 50 to 77%. 1 year after they changed their hiring practices, their turnover was 1.7%.
Wow.
And hospitalizations of their patients had gone down by something like 60%. And it was just, it was a stunning story. But I genuinely believe, particularly in terms of promotion to leadership and first line management, EQ is always, 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 always number one. There's a guy, and I quoted him in the Excellence Dividend book, who's the CEO of a modern, newish pharmaceutical company. And he said, we only hire nice people. And he said, biology. He said, the reality is there are a lot of people around who have those degrees. So don't hire the jerks.
Mm-hmm.
Public setting, but he said, I only have one rule for hiring. What the missing letters are, I'm sure. But and I really, this pharmaceutical with high intellect, big degrees, and so on. He said he sits down with him, the CEO. Your intelligence and so on. But he said, after they finish interviewing me, and this is an old-fashioned term, but he's for 10-minute receptionist to the, mid-level person in the finance department to what have you. And he said, we do it with 10 or 15 or 20 of those interviews. And every single one of those interviewers, including, let us say, the receptionist, can blackball that person with his PhD from MIT and God only knows what chemistry. And if they blackball him, the person's not in. And, I think that ought to be the case for all hiring, frankly. And I don't know what it means about the life future of people with low EQs, but, if I'm running my restaurant or running my consulting company, top of the list, what kind of a human being is it? I mean, there's another quote that I use from the very famous former Michigan University of Michigan football coach, Bo Schembechler.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I did pretty well in that pronunciation.
Not bad.
For Easterner. But at any rate, what he said is, I always look to recruit good people. He said, really decent people. And he said, time and time again, and year in and year out, my good people outperformed the people who, could throw a football 197 yards without raising a sweat or something. And he said, not only that, but then the greatest pleasure was that those are the kinds of people who went somewhere after they left our program, not meaning the pros, but in life. And
So, Tom, if you have low EQ, what the future holds for them, the future holds for them, they'll be replaced by computers and AI.
I think you're absolutely right. In fact, I read something that said, that's as true for the $175,000 a year, 24-year-old Stanford PhDs who are working for Google. The stuff that they can do in a coding room, AI has, it's not tomorrow, it's not the day after tomorrow, but you're right. The time frame is limited at some level. It's a positive, not a negative. All we got left as human beings is the EQ half.
Audrey, what do you think about that?
Well, I'm actually more curious about, in real-time snapshot, Tom, what you think managing through this crisis looks like, say, let's give it 30 days. So April 20th, this will have gone live before then.
Yeah.
Is your team whittled away to stay solvent? How do you deal with that? What other scenarios do you envision unfolding, and how do you deal with it?
Yeah. One thing I don't want to be at this time, Audrey, is glib. If you are talking about a 10-table, cool little restaurant in your community, and to do the renovation in the small building, whatever you want to call it, the restaurant space, you had to mortgage the house and take out a second mortgage. There is no way in the world that I am going to have a conversation with you two and give that person tips. The people who work for him or her, who are most likely, many of them, living on a shoestring, and our friend, the restaurant owner, with her or his new second mortgage, it looks like the government may be a little bit helpful with those things, but ain't going to get no glib answers out of me for those folks. I read an article yesterday, and I think this number is right, but I certainly wouldn't want to be held to it. There are something like 700,000 people in the United States who are housekeepers on the front line, and they're in trouble. I mean, I will say there is one thing I will say, that business is not about profit. It is about creating value. And if you do it right, the profit will mostly follow. So what I will say to the business person who did not take out the second mortgage, and you've got 14 terrific people, and they're short on insurance and they're short on this or what have you, dip into period. I am not very interested in your bank account staying good over the course of the next 4 or 5 months. You owe it to your team. I'm not suggesting that you have to, send your house into receivership, but I'm looking with a, really cynical eye at the CEOs of some of these giant companies who are laying people off by the thousands. That is bullshit. If you are sitting as a CEO who with stock options up the kazoo, even if they're worth 30% less this week today than they were last week, and you've got a bank account which is, $170 million, and if you lay frontline people off, you are a first-class, lifelong son of a bitch in my book. And, this is the time when you step up to the plates with human beings. This is the time when you forget about short-term or maybe even mid-term profitability and do your job. There's the guy whose name I can't pronounce, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who invented the idea of organizational flow and so on. And he wrote a book called Good Business. He's really a superstar. And in it, he said, the purpose of business is to increase human well-being.
Mm-hmm.
Business is about service, period. And I want the leaders to hurt as bad as they have to hurt and take care of the front line people, no matter how much it hurts. If you go bankrupt a year from now, I'm really sorry, but for God's sakes, be a decent human being. David Brooks wrote a column. That was one of the most powerful things that I had ever read. He said there are two kinds of virtues: resume virtues and eulogy virtues. And the resume virtues are the fact that you graduated summa cum laude from the Stanford Business School. The eulogy virtues was that Jane went out of her way to help people no matter what the situation was. I have some, and this is not about money, but this is about human practice group that I work with, which she'll remain nameless. And during the crash of 06, 7, 8, for the first time in their history, they had to do layoffs. And I remember talking to somebody who had observed the process, and they said, Christine was so incredible about dealing with people who had to be laid off that usually at the end, it was the laid off employee who was given Christine the if you've got a healthy bank account and it has to be unhealthy to help 7 housekeepers or 7 busboys or whatever it is, do what you have to do and what you can do, and work on. This is the time to work on those eulogy virtues.
Yeah, if all the things you've written and you've spoken about over the decades, Tom, that is probably my favorite thing that I've ever heard you say.
Well, that's very kind, but I'm not in a sour mood.
Nope. Well, you're very passionate.
Terrified by everybody else, but I'm in a sour mood when I see these giant companies doing things they don't have to do.
That makes sense. We're so.
It's fascinating, Audrey. There was this. It's in the Excellence Dividend. Fortune magazine has a 100 best companies to work for list every year. And a couple of years ago, the list had been around for something like 20 years. And they found that there were only 12 companies that had been a best company to work for. This will take us back to the Ritz-Carlton, by the way. Only 12 companies that had been on the list every year. And what I loved about it was 7 of those 12 companies were in areas where supposedly you can't afford to pay people well. Hospitality, food service, and so on and so on. And here's the kicker. So you got a jillion companies, 20 years, 12 make the cut, and the Fortune people went around trying to figure out, well, what did these 12 companies have in common? And unless you read the article, or unless I said it the last time we talked, there's no way in hell that you would ever guess the answer. The answer was the only thing they have in common is high benefits for part-timers. Only thing in common. And, when I read that, I was, sitting there reading the paper version of Fortune, and honest to God, I think I teared up. It was just incredible. Part-timers, I think it was at Nordstrom, get 18 days worth of, paid leave, stuff you just wouldn't believe. And the part-timer, and it's a big bloody deal, because one of the companies that made it on that top 12 was Publix, the grocery company headquartered in Florida. And Publix has 50,000 part-timers. And yet they treated them as if they were, real human beings. And I'm afraid, I'm tragically afraid that that's the exception, not the rule.
Well, I hope we get to talk to you again, Tom, when we all make this through this, and we wish you, safety and wellness. And I'm so blessed to have you, join us with some of your thinking on all this today. Obviously, we've never seen anything like this in our lifetime. So your thoughts duly noted, sir, and very valuable.
Thank you.
Well, I thank you very much for the opportunity, because as I said in my last answer, I think when we talk about leadership, this is the time for leaders to really step up. And the opportunity is always there. It's that metaphorical MBWA that we started with. Well, listen, thank you guys for inviting me, and I enjoyed it very much.
Well said,
okay,
sir.
Take care.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please rate and recommend on iTunes, Overcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get more great information at salesfuel.com.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.